Hello everyone, this is Ziggy Pixter here. So we're going to talk about some of the basic controls of the Axe Armor and show some intermediate level applications of how you could use them within a race. So first we're going to start off with just general movement. So nothing much has really changed here, his walk speed is the same as vanilla. When it comes to jumping, he jumps noticeably much higher, so he's able to actually progress throughout the castle. Whenever you get close to a doorway, it'll remove itself automatically, so you do not need to worry about doors or worry about unequipping or transforming. However, one additional thing to denote about some of the movement as you go through the castle is if you jump, you let go early, obviously you fall low earlier. If you press jump again, if at any point you let go and press it again, or you hit the natural max height of the jump, you actually start with the double jump. To keep this verticality in mind, it allows you to do a lot of out-of-logic checks that Alucard would not normally be able to do without a relic. In terms of additional mobility, we're going to start by covering the R2 button, which is probably the most important of the movement buttons to know, as you'll be using this button at least 90% of the game, no exaggeration. So by default, if you just hold it, so holding R2 / the wolf button while moving left and right, you're building up something in the background that I'm going to call momentum. So when you let go of movement, you might notice you slide a little bit. That's how you can tell if you have momentum. However, if you were to walk forward, jump, and let go of the direction, you'll see that I'll start consuming the momentum and fling myself quite a distance. So you could use this to platform in kind of interesting ways, or make jumps you would not normally be able to do. Because you might notice the Axe Armor normally has a very strict, limited vertical jump. This is going to be one way you could kind of abuse in order to get additional height. Now, when it comes to on-the-ground movement, if you instead attack while holding the wolf button in a direction, you'll notice you'll actually gain quite a bit of speed, so you could gauge how much momentum you have currently have. So, depending on how many wolf relics you have, will increase how fast you get it, as well as the max speed that you could go while doing some of these attacks. You could bind these two in order to get more of a horizontally oriented jump. So keep these in mind when you're platforming. So one additional movement option you have when you're attacking back and forth, let's say while holding the R2 button, is that if at any point you let go of the R2 button, you should come to an immediate stop. This should help you control your platforming a little better in case you are worried about slipping off the platform. As you can see, it's fairly responsive in terms of making sure that you don't slide further than intended. You can also slow down slightly by holding down on the D-pad while holding R2, in case you just want to keep some momentum, but not necessarily lose all of it. And finally, when it comes to basic momentum, we're going to go ahead and reset the room to showcase a couple of scenarios. So this is kind of hard to notice unless you've tried it before. If you hold the momentum button down, let's say we're going to hold right, notice I get flung to the right. Now look what happens when I hold momentum, or the R2 button, down and hold left. See how I'm able to completely predict and or control which direction I'm able to go in? This is pretty important for normal movement, I would say, especially in hallways filled with many enemies, to potentially skip all, or at least some, of the big hazards in your way. Now, when you do get knocked down, you end up in that flashing animation that gives you iframes. If you were to tap the bat button, or R1, you can actually get out of it faster. So just showcasing that technique a few times in a row, just so you can see the difference compared to if you're locked in place. That might help you if you accidentally boost in the wrong direction. Now just be aware that you only get a very limited opportunity to do so. You can't just hold the button down the whole time. If you do that in the air, it'll actually increase how long you have in the air. We're going to reset the room and showcase that alternative. So if you'd like to be in the air longer for longer damage boosts, there are practical purposes for it. Do something like this, for example. You can end up skipping more than just a normal enemy with the standard damage boost. So keep that in mind, there are definitely a lot of ways to tackle some of the trickier rooms in the game. So, let's talk about, can you believe it? We're actually not done with movement options before we talk about anything else. If you hold R2 up and jump, and you have gravity boots, you're gonna do a gravity jump. Now, like the standard gravity boots, whenever you initiate this gravity boot jump, you have iframes. So as long as you are traveling upwards and you do not let go of jump, you will have iframes. If you have leap stone and gravity boots, you could repeatedly chain those together, and you're only vulnerable in the brief moments that either you're falling or you let go. But you could use that to get through some of the more tricky parts of the game. And you'll need that, much like other relics, to progress like Alucard throughout the castle itself. So I believe that covers our basic movement options that you're going to be using throughout the run. So now we're going to move on to some of the other buttons. We're going to start with some of the, I guess, intermediate level movement techniques. So there's one in particular that we love to use. It's the mist button normally. People either call it kicky feet or face plant, depending on what relics you have. So let's showcase another way to get through an enemy wave with the same thing as before. So you might notice, at the cost of MP, I have iframes, I can slide through the enemy. This is a way to get through them in case you're low on health and you're looking to maintain your speed. Now, one important thing to notice is you can also use this in the air to extend your jump height. So for example, you build up some momentum and you do a jump. While face planting, you keep going. There's another use for this. And let's say you're in the air. So we're gonna jump again. We're gonna hold face plant, but this time hold the attack button. Notice our MP gauge is going down rapidly, but I'm not falling right away. You could use this to greatly extend your jump/flight duration, even without having the mist relics. Now, getting mist relics will make it better. You'll have the option for permaflight, which we'll get into in just a moment. That'll be under intermediate a bit more. So just keep that in mind. Now, you might have also noticed when I'm burning all this MP, take a look at our MP bar. Right now, you can see it recovers at like a decent rate. If I attack, it halves the rate. So doing this to boost through the castle actually does not regenerate a lot of MP. But look at this. When you hold still for a couple seconds, you might notice the MP regen goes out of control. This is to make sure that you never really get stuck in rooms like the tall chambers next to Aurochs, or even in the Aurochs room itself. Or if you're going into caverns/reverse caverns, you're able to ascend properly to finally escape it, as an example. Or enter it if it's in the reverse. So keep that in mind. If you feel like you burn out of or run out of MP by burning it out with repeated face plants or other methods we're going to talk about in a moment in order to move through the castle, just be aware sometimes standing still is weirdly one of the best control choices you can make. So I would definitely get into that habit to think of where can I get away with standing still in order to capitalize on my MP regen. Now there's a couple other things you can do within the face plant mode, as well as something else we'll talk about in a moment. Let's start with just the movement portions again, as I said before, with the R1 button, or the bat button. So bat, as you imagine, when you have the bat relic, gives you flight. But even without it, if you were to jump, for example, hit R1, you notice that I had an extended horizontal jump. The advantage of this over the faceplant button or the mist button is the fact that you could still attack, you can still use sub-weapons, and you can still use spells, which we'll cover in more details for how to actually kill things in the game. So keep that in mind. You have different flight methods. Gravity jump will generally be the fastest vertical one. The most control will generally be bat. The one that gives you iframes but requires you to land in order to attack or do anything again will be the mist button. So all these are important things to keep in mind and juggle as you go throughout the castle. So we're going to showcase something that you need to know how to do in order to progress and beat the game, just from a movement standpoint. So you might recall that there are lovely, lovely mist gates. Axe armor cannot turn into mist. However, as long as you have Power of Mist and Form of Mist, aka the blue and purple relics for Mist, you are able to perform a new movement option. So if you jump and you hold L1 and up, you can go slightly upwards with your faceplant versus just falling immediately, and that is enough to get through these mist gates. Now, if for whatever reason you get clipped into the floor, some jank happens, I mean, it is a hack, these things happen. Holding up plus mist should not cost you any MP to recover, and in fact I give you infinite flight in those scenarios, in case, for example, you only have Form of Mist to not permanently go up in the air. But let's say you just have Form of Mist by itself without Power of Mist. You're still able to hold it in order to recover in those scenarios. So please keep that in mind. There are some checks and balances in case you somehow clip out or weirdness happens. Don't panic. It's happened before. There's solutions for it. Now, since we're here, I'm going to showcase the other most important movement option in the game, and that is getting through blue doors. So you might notice I have the Jewel of Open, and you're like, oh no, Axe Armor can't use doors. Well, guess what? The doors are fake as long as you have the Jewel of Open. So feel free to go towards them. Do not fear them. They should just quote-unquote work by not stopping you. To keep that in mind, if you ever see a door, it's probably going to be deleted as soon as you get close to it, or in the case of the blue door, the outline will remain, so you know that it used a relic in order to pass through, but it will not stop you. So let's go back to this starting area without any other kind of crazy relics. We're going to hold the bat button down, and now we're going to hit the triangle button for the first time. This shoots out a twin fireball, small ones. They get deleted on contact with an enemy. Currently, they cost about 18 MP, and they are meant to be used either in the air or on the ground as follow-ups. They move fairly fast. If you're building momentum side to side, you should be able to chase after them to an extent, and that should also help you clear enemies as you go forward. So keep in mind that that's one option. One additional thing that I want to make sure that I show up within the control video that I think is important to know for people looking to do things like adventure mode or similar checks where you potentially need to go and hit things that are on the floor or things on the ceiling. If you hold R1 and hit up or hold down while hitting spell button, you can actually angle the fireball slightly. This will help you to hit some of those annoying floor pieces that might be a little tricky to use with Alucard or the equivalency of Axe Armor. So just keep that in mind, that if you're having trouble hitting stuff on the floor, you should be good to go. Now, I've reset the room a couple times, so if you're wondering why it said hidden room toggled, I just entered this room previously when I had access to Soul of Wolf and the Soul of Bat. Now, instead of needing to go back and forth in order to access the hidden room, just entering the room is good enough. It'll actually just get rid of that opening altogether. So you do not need to worry about going back and forth in order to transform into each respective form in order to activate it. So just keep that in mind, that there are checks you could do with these particular options, and we'll talk about some other things you could do. Now, if you hit just triangle without holding any direction, you can still hold R2 without this interfering. So let's just hold R2. Let's say we hit triangle. We're going to shoot a ice version of the giant fireballs. Now, those will multi-hit, those will pierce. The color of them designates the element. I recommend you hold R2 to avoid any kind of mispresses on the spells. If you hit up in triangle while holding R2, for an example, you're going to shoot a fire version of the fireball. The default neutral input is ice. And if you hit down in triangle, you're going to use lightning. So keep in mind, there are some bosses with some weaknesses to some elements, like your Cerberus, for example, or your poor creature have certain absorptions and weaknesses that you could kind of take advantage of, depending on who you're fighting. So keep those options in mind. They will scale based off of your intelligence. Axe Armor has been reworked completely in order for equipment to matter. We're going to cover that in a separate video. It is quite detailed. But just trust me when I say things like shields are important. Keeping weapons in the offhand is important. Your main weapon when you do this particular strike is based off of your right hand or the primary hand. So experiment a little bit with that, and you will find yourself potentially multi-hitting or hitting with different elements. And all those things might be something to consider. If you're going through the castle, which one is your highest single hit damage weapon for boosting quickly through enemies? Which one's a good multi-hit for bosses? So you'll find yourself kind of swapping equipment fairly often. Or if you find a really good weapon, maybe not so much. But hey, it is Castlevania, not all things are balanced. So there's one additional thing we could go through before we go into what I would consider more advanced options within the spectrum of movement. So let's briefly touch upon this. If you hit circle or the offhand weapon in Castlevania, you'll consume hearts even without a sub-weapon and put a sub-weapon down. Now, depending on what sub-weapon you get, it will change how it works. Axe throws like an axe. If you got the dagger, it'll roughly go in a straight line. Cross will make it return to you, like Richter's Cross. So take a look on the GitHub main page for the latest costs and or damage types. But just trust me when I say that sub-weapons are actually good, and they are actually important to have. So let's showcase some more advanced things that you could do that will help you, I would say, get a little further than, I would say, average gameplay. So we're going to showcase one advanced mechanic that I think is worth showing in the control video, because it is so make or break whether or not you could do this, that I feel like this is not optional to put in another video. So pay attention. We're going to go right before death. We can perform a death skip without any relics. I have Gravity Boot, but it's actually not needed. I'm going to tell you what to do here. Advanced technique. If you jump up while holding R2, so I'm holding R2, I jump up and hit face plant and hold up, you'll notice I fall a little slower than normal. If you hold square / the attack button, you can actually glide all the way through the death cutscene. Now we're going to show off a few more advanced things that are not specific to room clears, which I think are also appropriate for the control video. So we're going to jump to a file that has basically every relic, just to showcase some movement options. So you might notice, when I'm gliding around holding square, I move very fast. Just be aware that depending on how many relics you have, you can see it's going through every single relic benefit that I didn't have in the previous save file. It will impact your flight speed when you're face planting and holding square. It will also impact something more advanced, which is if you hold face plant and then hit R1, you actually have unlimited flight here as long as you have the Bat Relic or Form of Mist. So you can see I'm just kind of gliding infinitely. This will help you clear certain rooms or problem rooms, and you can speed up as needed. Now, one thing I want to showcase here are a few other things you could do with face plant. Now, you aren't required to have relics for these either, but they do require you to potentially have either hearts, sub-weapons, or a lot of MP. So we already covered holding square to boost and maintain the flight. We're not going to go over that in more detail again. I will denote that if you don't use the R1 button and you have all relics, generally speaking, L1 square and R2, in order to get unlimited mist flight, like this, is faster than holding R2, L1, and R1. So even if I speed boost, it's fast, but it's not as fast as if I just don't use the R1. The downside, of course, is you drift downwards without using R1. Anyway, just wanted to denote that. So let's talk about additional final commands. If you're face planting in the air, and you hit the triangle button, you can actually sacrifice hearts in order to restore your MP, which is really cool. You can see your hearts ticking down in real time to see how much the MP cost is for flight. So if you don't like the sub-weapons for whatever reason, and you find the regen hearts not as useful for damage, which hopefully will generally not be the case as you play the game, you could use that to stall or go through longer sections of the game with iframes. I think that's extremely important to know for races. One additional thing that may or may not save you is, let's say you are low on hearts, and your health total is kind of mediocre. Face plant in the air and press the circle button. You might notice that my health total restored, my hearts are restoring, at the cost of sacrificing a sub-weapon. So if you happen to know there's another sub-weapon nearby, you could think of this as kind of like your mini save point or your mini refill station. So things like Cubozoe are extremely impactful in this game. Having extra hearts is impactful in this game. Picking up sub-weapons, impactful for different ways, either because the damage is modified, the effect is modified, or this idea of converting. So circle, as a reminder, converts your sub-weapon into hearts and HP. Triangle, while face planting or holding L1, will sacrifice your hearts for MP. Holding square instead will sacrifice MP for speed. So with all those in mind, I think that covers the basic set of controls. We're going to take a look at one additional file that has Leapstone, just as an example. If you already have Leapstone, we're going to go to the bottom here. I'm going to showcase this. and actually jump up to 3 times. This could be important for you to get additional height, and as I said before, a little bit more sequence breaking opens up to you, so be creative, think about it, and you'll probably do pretty well with it. Now, when it comes to the relics, I'll just put one final note just so that you're aware the basis of the controls and how things are impacted. So we mentioned before, Leapstone Gravity Boots, plus R2 and jump, is infinite chainable jumps. So just as a reminder, that is a thing. The icon is grayed out, but that's just because of, we swap between games. I technically have Leapstone, even if it's not on the tracker, it's fine. So from the standpoint of other movement techniques, if you have a lot of Wolf Relics, expect your momentum to build faster, your speeds to go increase, and that also improves how fast you could fly with the face plant. So if you have a lot of Wolf Relics and a lot of Bat Relics, fully expect your movement options to really open up. I don't think there's really quote-unquote a useless relic. Most of them do things either for stat boost or something else. You'll be surprised what they can give to you or what they can offer to you. Now, if you then make a decision to skip it from there, personal choice, but just be aware, everything, including the familiar cards, now has an additional effect when picked up. At least when it comes to relics. So keep that in mind. Oh, one additional thing before we conclude the control video. We did pick up Spike Breaker. So if at any point, let's go to a save file that has Spike Breaker. Let's go to this one. So if you do have Spike Breaker on, quote unquote, like I'll just showcase to you. I don't have it equipped, but I have it in my inventory. You could just walk into the spikes without any kind of repercussion. So just be aware that you could do that. Keep in mind, if you're looking to do things like Blind Bat, I won't demonstrate in this video to the full extent. Just keep in mind that if you face plant, and you're going around left and right, and you need to get to a high area easily, and you have gravity boots, go ahead and gravity jump over and around the enemies that you see fit, while never leaving iframes. So keep that in mind, it's an important thing to do. So you'll figure out your own strategies in terms of how you're going to get through the room safely. So just think about it. There's little tells you could do. But just be aware that iframes are extremely important to take advantage of. If you do bonk on things like the spikes, just remember if you're holding R2 in a direction, you're going to be flung in that direction. So just be careful if you're doing normal jumps up here and you hit your head here. You might overshoot and end up over here, for example. So just keep that in mind for when you're trying to get through some of the trickier portions of the game. I think other than that, we've covered a good basis for controls. We gave you some intermediate tech in terms of flight and some options you could do there. We showcased 1 or 2 advanced techniques. In addition, we also showcased how to get through things like the mist gates. I guess the last thing that we could showcase, similar to the mist gates, is if you jump near these little all rocks ledges and then hit up with face plant while you have form of mist or bat or wolf, as in the base forms, you're able to do this little glide upwards and you're able to make that little jump. So if you see your character doing this, just try jumping a little bit first and it's usually fine. Now, future patches will work to get rid of some of the jank in terms of getting through checks like the mist gates and these particular all rocks bumps, I'll call them. They're not even like jumps per se. So keep an eye out for it. It might be simpler in the future. But for now, these cover all the things that you need to know in order to get started with Axe Armor. So hopefully you have fun, and hope to see you again next time.